Everyone in the neighborhood thought she was just the quiet 52-year-old woman next door, until the night she looked into my eyes during a thunderstorm and whispered, "Please stay with me tonight." The first time I really noticed Elena wasn't because she was beautiful. It was because she always looked like she was waiting for something. Every evening around sunset, she sat alone on the small porch outside her townhouse with a faded cream-colored blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a mug warming her hands while the neighborhood slowly dimmed into silence. She never scrolled through her phone like everyone else, never seemed distracted. She just sat there quietly, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one like they were old friends arriving late. I'd see her whenever I came home from work. At first, she was just the neighbor across the walkway, the elegant older woman who lived alone in Unit 4B. But after a while, I started slowing down whenever I passed her porch. Not intentionally. At least that's what I told myself. She had this calmness about her that felt strangely rare. Dark chestnut hair brushed softly against her shoulders, usually a little messy from the evening wind. Her clothes were simple: long sweaters, soft scarves, faded jeans, but she carried herself with quiet grace, like someone who used to be full of light and was still learning how to carry the shadows left behind. Sometimes she'd glance up as I walked by, and every single time, she'd smile politely. Small, careful, almost cautious, like she'd forgotten whether people still smiled back. Then came the rain. It started suddenly one Thursday evening while I was walking back from the grocery store. Heavy drops slammed against the pavement, and people rushed indoors while thunder rolled across the sky. That's when I saw her. Elena stood near the gate to the apartment walkway, struggling with a soaked cardboard box that had completely split open at the bottom. Cans rolled across the wet pavement while she knelt awkwardly, trying to gather everything before the rain ruined it. Without thinking, I dropped my own bags and hurried over. "Here," I said, crouching beside her. "I got it." "Oh no, you don't have to. You're fighting a losing battle with the weather." That finally made her laugh softly. It was the first real sound I'd ever heard from her. Warm, low, tired in a way that felt genuine. Together we gathered the groceries while rain soaked through both our jackets. Her fingers brushed mine once as we reached for the same soup can, and even through the cold rain, her touch felt surprisingly warm. "Thank you," she said quietly. Up close, I noticed things I hadn't before. Tiny lines near her eyes that deepened when she smiled. A faint scent of vanilla mixed with coffee. Raindrops clinging to loose strands of hair near her cheeks. She looked beautiful in a way that didn't demand attention. The kind that slowly settled into your chest before you realized it was there. I carried the ruined box to her front door while she unlocked it. The moment it opened, warmth spilled out into the hallway. Soft jazz played somewhere inside. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon candles and fresh coffee grounds. It felt peaceful. "Do you want a towel at least?" she asked. "You're drenched." I should have said no. Instead, I nodded. A few minutes later, I stood awkwardly inside her kitchen while she handed me a towel, her fingers lingering briefly against my wrist before pulling away. Not flirtatious, just gentle, human. "Most people would have kept walking," she said after a moment. I shrugged. "Most people are terrible neighbors." That earned another quiet laugh. Then she looked at me differently. Not guarded this time. Soft, almost vulnerable. "You're kinder than most people around here," she whispered. I don't know why that sentence stayed with me afterward. Maybe because it sounded less like a compliment and more like someone admitting they'd forgotten kindness still existed. The power went out just after midnight. 1 second my apartment was glowing with the pale blue light of the television, and the next everything vanished into darkness, so complete it made the entire building feel abandoned. Outside, rain hammered against the windows while thunder rolled low across the sky. I sighed, reaching for my phone flashlight when someone knocked softly on my door. 3 gentle taps. When I opened it, Elena stood there holding 2 candles and a small flashlight that barely worked. The flickering light softened her features, casting warm shadows across her face. Her dark sweater slipped slightly off one shoulder, and strands of chestnut hair framed her cheeks like she'd been running nervous fingers through it. "Sorry," she said with a small smile. "Do you happen to have extra batteries?" Mine died at the worst possible moment. Yeah, I think so. I stepped aside to let her in, but after searching through drawers and cabinets for nearly 10 minutes, I finally admitted defeat. I officially own everything except batteries. She laughed quietly, lowering her head for a second. Well, she said, lifting one candle slightly, at least we've got these. The hallway outside our apartments was cooler than inside, and somehow we both ended up sitting there on the floor, candles glowing between us while the entire building rested in silence. It should have felt awkward. Instead, it felt strangely easy. Rain echoed softly through the stairwell while we talked about nothing at first. Annoying landlords, bad cooking attempts, the ancient plumbing in the building. Then the conversation slowly drifted somewhere deeper. Elena, I asked carefully, were you always living here? She leaned her head lightly against the wall behind her. No, she said softly. I used to live in a much louder house. Something about the way she said it told me not to push too hard. Still, after a long pause, she surprised me. When I was younger, she continued, staring toward the candlelight, I loved storms like this. They made everything slow down. People stayed close to each other during storms. I watched the flame reflect in her eyes. And now? I asked. She smiled faintly. Now, they just make the silence louder. The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. Before I could stop myself, I admitted something too. I think that's why I hate quiet. Her eyes shifted toward me gently. This city still feels temporary, I said. Work, apartment, routine, none of it feels like home yet. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Elena moved slightly closer without seeming to realize it. Our knees brushed briefly in the narrow hallway space. Neither of us moved away. That feeling doesn't disappear as much as people pretend it does, she said quietly. You just get better at carrying it. The candle flickered between us. I noticed small details I hadn't before. The softness in her expression when she listened, the careful way she chose her words, how calm her voice felt in the middle of the storm. At one point, she laughed at one of my terrible jokes and instinctively touched my forearm. Just for a second. But her hand stayed there long enough for warmth to spread through my chest before she slowly pulled away. The silence afterward felt heavier somehow. Not uncomfortable. Aware. Hours slipped by without either of us noticing. The storm outside softened into steady rain while the candles burned lower and lower. Eventually, the hallway lights suddenly flickered back on. Reality returned with them. Elena blinked against the brightness, almost disappointed. I should probably let you sleep, she murmured, slowly standing. I stood too, suddenly aware of how close we'd been sitting all night. She paused outside her apartment door, fingers resting against the handle. As she looked back at me, not guarded, not distant, just honest. I forgot what it feels like, she said softly, to talk to someone this easily. Before I could answer, she disappeared quietly inside her apartment. And for the first time since moving there, the hallway outside my door didn't feel empty anymore. After the storm night, something changed between us. Not dramatically. There were no sudden confessions or lingering kisses in the hallway. Just small things. Softer smiles. Longer conversations near the mailboxes. The quiet comfort of knowing someone else was awake when insomnia kept the lights on past midnight. And somehow, those small things started mattering too much. Every morning before work, I caught myself looking toward Elena's porch. Sometimes she'd already be there with her coffee, wrapped in one of her oversized sweaters while cool wind moved gently through her hair. Whenever she saw me, her face brightened in a way that felt natural now, like she expected me. That feeling should have been harmless. But the neighborhood noticed too. It started with passing comments. An older man from downstairs smirked when he saw us talking near the parking lot. Careful, he muttered jokingly. Elena's got herself a young admirer. I forced a laugh, but irritation twisted immediately in my chest. A few days later, two women near the laundry room stopped talking the second Elena walked in beside me. One of them gave her a look that lasted just a little too long before whispering something under her breath. Elena pretended not to notice, but I did. And after that, she changed. Subtly at first. She stopped lingering outside my apartment door after conversations. The casual coffee invitations disappeared. Her texts became shorter, more careful. It felt like watching someone slowly close a window right after finally letting fresh air inside. One evening, I came home late from work and spotted her sitting alone near the far edge of the courtyard. The autumn air had turned colder, and she sat curled beneath the weak glow of a porch light, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her phone rested face down beside her. Even from a distance, I could tell she'd been crying. I approached slowly. Elena. She startled slightly before forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Hey, you okay? Fine. The answer came too quickly. I sat beside her anyway. For a while, neither of us spoke. Wind moved softly through the trees overhead while distant thunder rolled somewhere far beyond the city. Then I noticed her hands trembling slightly against her sleeves. Bad night, I asked quietly. She stared ahead at the empty street. My ex-husband called. Something inside me tightened immediately. She laughed once under her breath, but it sounded hollow. He's getting remarried. I didn't know what to say. Not because I lacked sympathy, because the pain in her voice felt deeper than jealousy. It sounded like grief for an entire version of her life that no longer existed. Elena, I know it's ridiculous, she whispered quickly. I left him years ago. I should be over it. You don't sound ridiculous. They made her eyes close briefly. The cold wind picked up harder, and without thinking, I pulled off my hoodie and held it toward her. You're freezing. You'll be cold. I'll survive. For a second, she hesitated before slipping it over her shoulders. The sleeves swallowed her hands completely. Something about that nearly broke me. She pulled the fabric closer around herself and inhaled softly, like the warmth comforted her more than she expected. Then she finally looked at me, really looked at me. You know what the hardest part is? She asked quietly. I shook my head. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. People always have something to say when a woman my age starts feeling alive again. The sentence hung between us heavily. Suddenly everything made sense. The distance, the hesitation, the carefulness in her eyes lately. She wasn't pulling away because she didn't feel something. She was pulling away because she did. I moved slightly closer beside her until our shoulders touched lightly. Just enough warmth to say I'm here. She didn't move away. Instead, her head lowered slowly until it rested against my shoulder for the briefest moment. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, but I felt every heartbeat of it. Neither of us spoke after that, because some silences say more than words ever could. The knock came a little after midnight. Soft, uneven, like whoever stood outside my apartment door almost changed their mind halfway through. I was still awake, sitting on the couch with my laptop open but untouched while rain slammed against the windows hard enough to rattle the glass. Thunder rolled across the sky in slow waves, turning the whole building heavy with sound. The second I opened the door, my chest tightened. Elena stood there soaked from the storm. Her dark hair clung damply to her cheeks, and she held her coat closed tightly around herself like she'd walked outside without realizing how cold it was. Her mascara had faded slightly beneath tired eyes that looked unfocused, almost lost. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she gave me a small, embarrassed smile. Sorry, she whispered. I know it's late. It's okay, I said immediately. What happened? She looked down briefly before answering. I got another call tonight. I already knew who she meant. Thunder cracked outside, making her flinch almost invisibly. Without thinking, I stepped aside. Come in. Warm air wrapped around us the second she entered the apartment. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom while she stood quietly near the doorway, rainwater dripping from the edge of her sleeves onto the floor. Here, thanks. As she dried her hair slowly, I noticed how exhausted she looked, not physically but emotionally. Like she'd spent years holding herself together so carefully that even one difficult night threatened to unravel everything. You want tea? I asked. She nodded softly. A few minutes later, we sat together on the couch while rain battered the windows beside us. I gave her my thickest blanket, and she pulled it around herself gratefully, tucking her bare feet underneath as she curled slightly into the corner cushion. The apartment glowed softly with warm lamplight. Outside, the storm felt endless. Inside, everything felt strangely quiet. "Elena," I said carefully, "you don't have to pretend you're okay around me." She stared down at the steaming tea in her hands for a long time before speaking. "I heard he's moving into the house we used to share." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I stayed silent. Sometimes people don't need solutions, just someone willing to stay. "He already sounds happier," she continued quietly. "Isn't that strange? Someone can leave your life completely and still make you feel replaceable years later." The honesty in her voice hurt to hear. She laughed softly after a moment, though there was no humor in it. "I am sorry. This is probably pathetic." "It's not pathetic." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and something shifted in the room. Not sudden, not reckless, just undeniable. Thunder shook the windows again, louder this time, and instinctively her fingers wrapped around my hand resting between us on the couch. The contact froze both of us for half a second. Her skin felt cool from the rain. Mine trembled slightly beneath hers, but neither of us pulled away. Slowly, carefully, I turned my hand enough to hold hers properly. Her breathing changed immediately. Softer, unsteady. A strand of damp hair had fallen across her face, and before I could overthink it, I reached up gently and brushed it behind her ear. My fingertips barely touched her skin. Still, her eyes closed for the briefest second. Like the tenderness of it caught her off guard. When she opened them again, there was vulnerability there I'd never seen before. Not fear of me, fear of needing someone again. The rain softened outside into a steady rhythm. The room grew quieter, closer. Then, almost barely audible over the storm, she whispered, "Stay with me tonight." The words weren't seductive. They weren't impulsive. They sounded fragile, lonely, like someone standing at the edge of their own heartbreak, asking not to face it alone. And in that moment, looking into her tired, searching eyes, I realized staying with her meant far more than simply spending the night. For a few seconds after Elena whispered those words, neither of us moved. The storm outside filled the silence between us, rain sliding steadily against the windows while thunder rumbled farther away now, softer than before. She looked down almost immediately after saying it, like she regretted letting the thought escape out loud. "You don't have to," she added quietly. I don't really want to be alone tonight." Something about the vulnerability in her voice made my chest ache. Not because she sounded weak, because she almost never allowed herself to sound vulnerable at all. I squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes lifted slowly toward mine, and the smallest expression crossed her face. Relief mixed with disbelief, like she wasn't used to people staying once things became emotionally complicated. A little while later, we walked across the hallway to her apartment together. The lights inside were dim, except for the soft yellow glow above the kitchen stove. Rain tapped gently against the balcony doors now, calmer than before, and the entire apartment carried that familiar scent of coffee, vanilla candles, and something floral I still couldn't identify. Home. That was what her apartment felt like. Elena disappeared briefly into her bedroom and returned wearing soft gray lounge clothes and a loose sweater that slipped slightly off one shoulder. Her damp hair rested naturally around her face now, and without makeup or careful composure, she somehow looked even more beautiful, more real. "You can take the couch," she said softly. "Very generous of you." A tired laugh escaped her lips. "There are blankets in the closet," but neither of us moved right away. Instead, we stayed in the kitchen, making tea neither of us truly wanted, just to keep talking. The conversation wandered slowly through old memories and quiet regrets. She told me about the years after her divorce, how silence became easier than disappointment, how she stopped attending dinners with friends because eventually everyone looked at divorced women with either pity or suspicion. "I think I forgot how to let people close to me," she admitted quietly. I leaned back against the counter, watching her carefully wrap both hands around her mug. "You're doing okay right now. That's because it's you." The words came out softly, honestly, and suddenly the room felt smaller, warmer. Neither of us spoke for a moment after that. Eventually, we moved to the couch together, sitting closer this time without thinking about it. The storm outside faded into a low, steady rain, while an old jazz playlist hummed quietly through the apartment speakers. At some point during the conversation, Elena's voice began slowing. Her eyelids grew heavier. "You should sleep," I murmured gently. "So should you." A few minutes later, while she was in the middle of telling me a story about getting lost in Chicago years ago, her words trailed off completely. Then slowly, almost cautiously, she leaned against me. Her cheek rested lightly against my chest. I froze at first, not because it felt wrong, because it felt unbearably right. The warmth of her body settled softly beside mine, while her breathing became slow and even. One of her hands rested loosely near mine on the couch cushion, and after hesitating briefly, I covered it gently with my own. Her fingers curled instinctively against mine, even in sleep. Outside, rain whispered softly against the windows. Inside, everything felt still, safe. After a while, she stirred awake slightly, blinking in sleepy embarrassment once she realized she'd fallen asleep against me. "Oh God," she whispered, sitting up halfway. "I'm sorry." I smiled. "You drool less than most people." That earned a quiet laugh, the kind that made her eyes crease warmly at the corners. Then, before either of us could overthink the moment, she leaned closer. Slowly, carefully, her lips brushed my cheek near the corner of my mouth in the softest, lingering kiss imaginable. Not rushed, not passionate, just trembling honesty. When she pulled away, her face remained inches from mine. Neither of us spoke, because words suddenly felt too small for whatever this was becoming. Later that night, I settled onto the couch beneath one of her blankets while she stood quietly near the hallway entrance, watching me with tired but softer eyes. "Good night," she whispered. For the first time in a long time, she didn't sound lonely when she said it. The morning after I stayed at Elena's apartment, everything felt different. Not awkward, not rushed, just fragile. Like we'd crossed an invisible line neither of us fully understood yet. When I left for work that morning, she walked me to the door barefoot, wrapped in her oversized cream sweater while sunlight spilled softly through the kitchen windows behind her. For a second, neither of us seemed sure how to say goodbye. Then her fingers found mine naturally. A small touch. Warm. Careful. "Thank you," she whispered. I almost kissed her then. Instead, I squeezed her hand once before leaving. And somehow, that felt even more intimate. But the world outside her apartment wasn't as gentle as the one we'd quietly built together. Over the next few days, the tension around us became impossible to ignore. Neighbors stared longer now. Conversations stopped when we entered shared spaces. One afternoon, I caught two men smirking while Elena checked her mail downstairs. "She moves fast for someone her age," one muttered quietly. The anger that hit me was immediate, sharp enough to make my jaw tighten. But Elena heard it too. I saw it in the way her shoulders stiffened instantly. That night, she barely answered my texts. The next day, she avoided me completely. By the third day, I finally knocked on her door. When she opened it, her expression already looked apologetic. "Elena, you shouldn't be here." The sentence hurt more than I expected. "You stay out here quietly. Why are you pushing me away again?" She looked exhausted. Because she was. Not physically. Emotionally. "I'm trying to protect you," she whispered. "From what?" "From becoming the story everyone laughs about." I stepped closer carefully. "I don't care what people say." "Well, I do." Her voice cracked unexpectedly. She turned away immediately, arms wrapping tightly around herself, as if holding her own emotions together. "You're young," she continued softly. "You still have your whole future ahead of you. One day you'll realize this was just comfort during a lonely time." I shook my head immediately. "No." She laughed bitterly under her breath. "You don't know that yet. I know how I feel when I'm with you." That finally made her look at me. Really look at me. And once I started speaking, I couldn't stop. "I care about the way you smile when you forget to be guarded," I said quietly. "I care about your late-night stories and the stupid jazz music you always play when it rains. I care that you pretend to be strong, even when you're hurting." Her eyes were already shining with tears now. I stepped closer again. I don't care what this looks like to anyone else, I whispered. I care about what it feels like when I'm with you. The room went silent. Elena's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to respond, but emotion caught somewhere deep in her throat instead. Then finally, after weeks of holding herself together so carefully, she broke. Not dramatically, quietly. One tear slipped down her cheek before another followed behind it. I'm scared, she admitted in barely more than a whisper. I moved gently toward her. Of what? Her hands trembled slightly when they reached for mine. Of believing someone could actually stay. The honesty in her voice nearly shattered me. Without thinking, I lifted one hand slowly and brushed my thumb beneath her eye, catching the tear before it could fall farther down her cheek. She leaned into the touch immediately, instinctively, like she'd been starved of tenderness for years. Then her arms slipped carefully around my waist, hesitant at first, as though she still expected rejection even now. I held her tighter instantly. Her cheek rested against my chest while her breathing shook softly between us. Neither of us rushed the moment. We simply stood there holding each other in the middle of her quiet apartment while evening light faded slowly through the windows. And when she finally tilted her face upward toward mine, the kiss that followed felt nothing like fantasy. It felt real, slow, emotional. Her lips trembled softly against mine, cautious and deeply tender, like both of us understood this wasn't just desire anymore. This was trust. And for the first time since meeting her, Elena stopped looking afraid of being loved. Months passed quietly after that kiss, the kind of time that doesn't feel like a dramatic transformation, but instead like something slowly settling into place. Like dust finally resting after a long storm. Elena and I didn't announce anything to the neighborhood. We didn't need to. People noticed anyway. The late-night conversations on her porch became routine again, but this time there was no hesitation in the way she leaned slightly toward me when she laughed. No careful distance in how I stood beside her while she made coffee in the mornings. What once felt uncertain now felt natural. One evening, I found her waiting for me outside my building instead of her own. She was sitting on the porch swing wrapped in a soft shawl, watching the sunset paint the sky in warm orange tones. When she saw me, her face softened instantly, that same gentle expression I first noticed months ago, but now without the sadness behind it. Just peace. You're late, she teased lightly. Traffic, I said, smiling as I sat beside her. She shifted closer immediately, as if it was something her body had memorized without thinking. Her shoulder rested lightly against mine. No hesitation anymore. No fear. Just closeness. The porch swing creaked softly as we moved in slow rhythm, the evening air warm and still around us. For a while, we didn't speak. We didn't need to. A few neighbors passed by and glanced at us, curiosity still lingering in their eyes, but Elena didn't look away this time. Neither did I. Let them look, because what we had was no longer fragile. It was real. Later that night, she cooked dinner in her apartment while I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching her move comfortably around the space. There was something calming about her presence now. Not just beauty or charm, but familiarity. Like home had finally found its rhythm. At one point, she reached past me for a spice jar, her hand brushing my arm briefly. But this time, neither of us reacted, because touch was no longer a question. It was language. After dinner, we stepped out onto her porch together. The air had cooled slightly, and the neighborhood was quiet except for distant traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves. Elena leaned her head gently against my shoulder. No hesitation, no tensión, just trust. I used to think I was running out of time, she said softly. Her hand rested gently against my jaw while mine settled at her waist, holding her close without urgency. It wasn't about fear anymore, or loneliness, or needing someone to fill silence. It was about choice. After a moment, she pulled back just enough to rest her forehead against mine, both of us breathing in the same quiet space. And in that stillness, I realized something simple. This wasn't a story about an age gap, or rumors, or timing. It was about two people who had spent years learning how to be alone, finally choosing not to be. And as the porch light glowed softly behind us, Elena's hand tightened slightly in mine, not out of uncertainty, but because she never wanted to let go again.